Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about the future of the comic industry, but I'm going to do it in my normal, long-winded, unique way by looking at heroes. Now, quickly, for anybody who is a new subscriber, because I have a lot of new subscribers, when I created this channel, and what I see this channel as being, is not a comics channel itself. I talk about comics mainly, but I don't see it as a comics channel. I see it as a forum to talk about heroes. That's why I created this channel to begin with. I love to talk about heroes. And the thing is that I talk about heroes in the traditional sense. And I think this is something we need to do not just for writing, but for everyday life as well. Because the traditional idea of hero has been with us for more than 3,000 years, in literature at the very least. If you include verbal storytelling with literature, then yeah, it's been around for at least 3,000 years, I would say. And philosophically, it's been with us that way, the way that is traditionally viewed, for at least 2,400 years. And this traditional idea of hero, that a hero is a paragon of virtue, it has stood the test of time. And I think that that has happened not by accident, but because this idea of being a hero actually speaks to us and has more than a kernel of truth to it. And it speaks to us because each of us, I would say, wants to be heroic. Individually, each of us wants to be a hero. Now, it's complicated by our broken human nature, but each of us wants to be a hero. So when I talk about putting a hero down on a page correctly, yes, I do it according to this traditional idea of a hero. But I think that that traditional idea of writing a hero speaks to us so much because each of us individually wants to be heroic. And that's why I think that comics have spoken to us, certainly the older generation, even though we didn't know, possibly, that was what it was conveying to us. Because over the last, I would say at least 100 years, there has been a destruction of the idea of the heroic within Western civilization. And so us people, us normal people, who I would say naturally just want to be heroic, we were searching out for some examples of how to be heroic, because you had all of these pressures trying to drive out that idea of heroism. And a lot of us found comics where you had heroes. And so at the very least, even though we might not be able to understand, say philosophically, how this worked, we at the very least could imitate that heroic nature of the people down on the page, because this literary idea of hero certainly preceded the philosophical idea of hero as a paragon of virtue. And so I'm going to talk about the industry itself according to this ideal of being a hero, that a hero is a paragon of virtue. Now, I'm going to briefly go over what I have gone over before about how this idea of virtues has come down through history to us for the last, again, at least 2,400 years. Those virtues were traditionally separated into 4 categories, and those 4 categories were put in a very specific order. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Now, I want to concentrate on the one that I have not really concentrated on at all yet, which is temperance. But I'll go over the others very quickly. But before we even look at those virtues, when you look at it philosophically, the idea was that before you even got to the first virtue, which was prudence, you had to have a thing called right reason. That is to say, you had to have not only reason, but reason in accord with reality. Because if you look at some people, especially these quote-unquote progressive people, like the people who run comic books, they certainly do use reason to some extent, but they use it in little logic boxes. They use it as game theory. They use it to have an internally consistent argument sometimes, but they don't use it so that it is in accord with reality. If you took those ideas and compared them with reality, especially these progressive ideas, they don't actually match up. So what you have to have is reason that's not just internally consistent. You can't just have reason that is good within its form, as it were, logically, but you have to have reason that is good, proper within its matter. That is to say, in accord with reality. So you have to look at reality in this reasonable way, and you have to make sure your reason is in accord with reality. And then that will lead to the first virtue, which is prudence. Now, prudence is correct decision making. So you make decisions that are in accord with reality, and then they will work out for you. Now, in order to have the next virtue, first you have to have prudence, and then you can have justice. And what is justice? Well, justice is rendering to everyone what is their due, according to reality, of course. And once you have justice, then you can move on to fortitude. Fortitude is the courage to live out those prudent decisions and those just actions that you have already implemented within your life. It is the courage to do so. And once you have fortitude, then you can move on to temperance. Now, temperance is something that a lot of people, again, today, really don't quite understand because it has been muddled so much. A lot of people would think of it in terms of eating and drinking. You need to be temperate in what you eat and what you drink. But really, although that has a small part to do with what temperance is, temperance, traditionally, philosophically, is the taking of all of the parts and unifying them within the specific order, again, according to reality. That's what temperance is supposed to be, taking the parts and unifying them in an ordered way. And what temperance is supposed to do, because temperance as a virtue is seen as the linchpin of all of these other things that I've just been talking about. It is supposed to take all of those things that I've talked about and to reorder them again. I always think about all of these things: right reason, prudence, justice, fortitude, and then temperance, as if they were dominoes in a circle. And when you get to temperance, it backs up onto right reason again. That's where the circle begins again. And so when you have temperance, when you take the parts and you order them correctly, then you take that circle of dominoes that go around, you make it more ordered and more unified. And that's what you're supposed to do. So once you get to temperance, you begin once again at right reason, because it reorders your ideas about how to see the world in a better way. And so you can have better right reason, and your better right reason leads to more prudent decisions, which leads to more just actions, which leads you to be more courageous, which leads you to be more temperate and more ordered. And so what you're doing is you are ascending upwards these steps of virtue in order to be a hero. And that is what is supposed to happen within your life if you want to be a hero, and traditionally how you put a hero down upon the page. And so, as I said, temperance is supposed to be the linchpin, that which connects the end to the beginning once again and allows you to ascend upwards. But the thing is that it also works in the reverse. This linchpin of temperance works in the reverse. If you are intemperate, if you have the vice of intemperance, it will work in the reverse, inasmuch as the following is the case. Now, let's start looking at the comic industry. If we look at the comic industry and look at the people who run the comic industry and see how they are intemperate, see how they have this vice of intemperance, this will show us exactly what I'm talking about. Because you look at these people, they have a disordered way of thinking. This quote-unquote progressive way of thinking, it takes the normal idea of how a person is supposed to act properly and it flips it on its head in the following way. The idea, traditionally, of a way for a person to understand everything around him is the fact that you have reason and you have passion. But reason is supposed to be the master. Passion is supposed to be the servant. Now, both of these things are good. Both of these things have to be implemented if you want to live a good, healthy, fulfilling life. But reason, ratio, is supposed to be the master. Your feelings, your passions, as Cicero would say, your perturbationes. In the Greek, it would be pathai, I think. Anyway, you take your feelings, your passions, and they are supposed to be subservient to your reason. But their entire ideology flips this on its head. Their entire progressive ideology is to say that passions are the master, reason is to be the servant. And that's why it leads them into the idea that, yes, we can use reason within these little logic boxes, within this game theory, so that we have an internally consistent argument and convince people with that. But that's all we need reason for, because passions are the master and reason is the servant. But this is a disordered way of thinking. How history has shown traditionally that people flourish is to live in the ordered fashion of having reason first and passion as the servant of reason. This is the order that has worked for mankind when he has actually flourished. But again, these people who run the comic industry, they have this vice, this disordered, intemperate way of looking at how human beings act and their relationship to everybody else and everything else around them. Now, the thing is that when you have this vice of intemperance and you are disordered, what happens? Well, you look at reality in a disordered way. When I was going over the last podcast I covered, I thought it was supremely funny that these quote-unquote progressive writers that Marvel is touting as the next generation of Marvel writers, they all talk about the fact that you have to view things through a series of mirrors, through a series of lenses. And of course, if you look at something through a series of lenses or a series of mirrors, they're going to be distorted. Because that's how these people see reality. They think reality is a distortion of what it actually is, because they look at it through this series of mirrors or lenses. So they have this disordered way of looking at reality. And when you look at reality in this disordered, intempered way, what happens? Well, it knocks over the domino, the first domino of temperance, which then knocks over right reason. Because you can't have reason that is in accord with reality if you can't see reality correctly. And if you knock over that domino of right reason, and you need right reason in order to be prudent, well then that knocks down prudence. And if you need prudence in order to be just, then prudence knocks down the further dominoes of justice. And if you need justice in order to have courage, in order to have fortitude, well then it knocks down fortitude as well. And then if you need fortitude in order to be temperate, then that knocking down of fortitude also knocks down all the rest of temperance. And so it spirals downwards. And this is the spiral downward, not just of a villain, because this is what happens traditionally on the page with a villain. He's spiraling downwards through these vices. But it happens with these people in their lives as well, who have this disordered way of thinking. And we can see this really clearly if we look at what's going on with the comic industry right now. We can understand that these people don't have right reason. They don't look at reality in the way that it actually is, according to a logical, objective way of thinking. We can see this in all of these ideas that they are touting. They would say that, no, you define what reality is according to your feelings. If you say you are a different species than a human being, if you say you are a different age than you've actually been upon the earth, all of these things, they say, yes, that is your definition of reality. And of course, that destroys any kind of right reason whatsoever. Let's look at prudence. We don't have to go very far to see that these people don't make good decisions. They take all of these titles and all of these characters that no one wants to see, and they just put them out there again and again and again. They reboot the same thing with the same people and the same failed ideas, thinking that it's going to have a different result, and it never does. And this, of course, just shows that they don't make decisions in accord with reality. Therefore, they're not prudent. Let's look at justice. When you see the hiring practices of these people, and again, I went over that in the podcast that I covered in my last few videos, you see that they hire people according to their skin color. They hire people according to their race. They hire people according to their sexual orientation and all of these things. They don't hire people according to merit. And what is that? Well, that's unjust. That's an unjust action. And in addition to that, they take all the people who wrong think, they take all the people that have a different idea of how things work, that would be to say these conservative-minded people, and they drive them out of the industry. These people, like your John Malins and your Ethan Van Skyvers, they drive them out of the industry. And again, that's unjust. If we look at fortitude, we can see clearly that these people have no fortitude whatsoever. Last year, I did a series of videos after the San Diego Comic-Con about this panel where you had these comic pros, and they were all talking about how they had to shut people out of their social media. They had to clamp down and make sure only the people who they wanted to speak could speak. And why? Because they have no courage. They have no fortitude. They can't listen to people with opposing ideas. If they hear those kind of opposing ideas, they just can't stand it because they have no fortitude whatsoever. And again, they have no temperance because they see the world in this disordered way where passions are supposed to rule over reason. So let's take all of that and apply it to the comic industry, because I firmly believe that the collapse of the comic industry that is going to happen in the near future is going to happen according to this disorder, this vice of intemperance. That's where it's going to come from, and it has a very specific timeline. We have seen this spiral downwards already once. Now, if you go back to, say, 2012, not many of us knew what was going on with the comic industry. We didn't know that these people, these progressive ideologues, had taken over the industry. Only the people who were actually really within the know, people like Doug Ernst, they knew that this was going on. But us normal people, even us normal comic readers, we didn't realize this. But over that time, we have begun to realize. And that has happened because I would say we have already gone down one of these spirals of vices. And again, it has a very specific timeline. And the collapse of the industry, this new timeline, this new spiral downwards, has a very specific start date. And that is November 3rd, 2020. Because the collapse of the industry is not going to happen because of low sales. It's not going to happen because you have no one buying books or because of the low quality of the comics. It's not going to happen because of the shutting down of comic shops. It's not going to happen because of the pressure put on it by Comicsgate and your crowdfunding people. All of those things play a part, and I would say have an important role in what's going to come afterwards, but that's not what's going to trigger the end of the comic industry, or the collapse, as it were, of the comic industry. What is going to trigger this collapse is something that has nothing to do with comics whatsoever. Because, of course, if you want to look at what's going to happen in the future, you look at what has happened in the past. And it's something that no one is really concentrating on, I think. It is the fact that on November 3rd, 2020, you're going to have the next federal election. And this is what is going to cause the collapse of the comic industry. Because, well, I'm not going to be so hubristic as to say that Donald Trump is going to win, but if you look at all of the probabilities, it is most probable that he is going to win. If you look at presidents who go for a second term, most of the time they win a second term. If you look at presidents who have this high of approval rating, they usually win a second term. If you look at presidents who have bettered the economy as much as this president has, usually they win a second term. So all the probabilities are that Donald Trump is going to win a second term in 2020, and the election day is November 3rd. And why is this so important? Well, because I have read and listened to a number of interviews with comic pros, people who are artists, people who are writers especially, people who produce the comics, people who run the comic industry, like Sana Amanat over at Marvel, and almost every one of these interviews, if it has any length whatsoever, they always talk about the election of Donald Trump as being a turning point for how they produced comics. And it began this spiral downwards. And I'll give you one example. It's G. Willow Wilson. Now, I did a whole video on this, and I'll link it at the end. It's the one with Wonder Woman in the thumbnail. She literally said that she wanted to change the world. That's why she became a writer, because she saw writers as changing the world. They do this by changing the minds of the people who read their stuff, and those people go out and implement the ideas that they have implanted within those readers and change the world. And she saw it according to this normal progressive way that they would do it slowly. That is what these progressive ideas, according to their literal playbooks, are supposed to do. There are a number of sources, books, literal books, where they say that if you want to advance your progressive ideology, you need to do it slowly. And it's called the slow march or the long march through the institutions. And that's how they take over things. And she was content to work according to this slow timeline. But for her, everything producing her comic, her motivation, and how she did things changed when Donald Trump won the election. Now, they never actually name Donald Trump. He's like the dark one, he who cannot be named. They just say, when this current administration came into the White House. She saw her entire world flipped on its head, and this changed everything about how and why she produced comics. What she did after that point was, as she says, is to provide a stronghold, a bulwark, a place for these progressive leaders to retreat to so that she can provide them with what she calls hope fuel. So what she wants to do is to take these people that she wants to influence, she wants to implant these progressive ideas upon them, and these people are to be the stronghold for these progressive leaders. They are to give these progressive leaders hope. They are to give these progressive leaders fuel so that when the time comes for them to advance again, then they are fueled up and are ready to go. And this is why she produces comics. This is why she produces stories. This is her stated reason now, since the last election, that she does things. And this is the same with all of these comic producers, whether they be artists or writers or colorists or people who are in some kind of administration position. This is what all of them want to do and why they are there. But the thing is that whole mindset is that, well, look, we were advancing and we were advancing slowly and things were going fine, but we got pushed back. And so we had to retreat to our stronghold, and we will refuel, we will give people hope, and then we will push out once again. But the thing is that they believe this new push that they are going to win is the next election. And when they see that they are going to lose, when that actually happens once again, when they have seen that no matter what they have done over the last 4 years, they are continually being pushed backwards and there's going to be no end in sight, what are they going to do? Well, in their disordered fashion, they are going to lash out. And if you think the lashing out from the last election was bad, you just wait until 2020 is over. You're going to see lashing out from these people like crazy. And no one is going to be able to stop them. As I covered in my last video, you had one of these Marvel writers saying, you know, I work for hire and I do what I'm told, but there's things that they can't make me do. And this is really my stuff, so I'll do what I want with it. So basically she's saying that, yeah, I'll do what they tell me as long as I agree with what they tell me to do. But as soon as they tell me something different, no, I'm going to go my own way. And I'm going to use all of this stuff because it's mine. These characters that I write, they're mine. And this is my stuff, and I'll do it my way. And this is what you're going to see. This disorder is going to exponentially increase. And it's going to affect, again, the way that they make decisions. They're going to double down on these bad decisions. They're going to make them over and over again. It's going to accent this injustice that they practice day after day, not just within their hiring, but within the entire industry. And when they get pushed back on it once again, they're going to show their massive cowardice. And they're going to lash out in this cowardly way. And this disorder, this new spiral downwards within to villainy, is going to happen after November 3rd. This is the timetable. This is what's going to happen to the comic industry. It has really nothing to do with the comic industry at all. It has to do with politics, because these people and their ideology think that politics is what governs everything. That's where everything comes from. It's from politics. So they are placing all of their hopes on this new election. And just as us people who read comics didn't really know what was going on in 2012, but have since learned what is going on with this spiral downwards that has been going on over the last 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, we are going to see such a disorder within this industry that normal people are going to start to see what exactly is going on. People who just go and see Marvel movies, people who just have some idea of what comics are, they're going to see this massive disorder within this industry and within other industries, I would say as well, but certainly this industry. And this is going to happen in part because these people who produce comics, they see them as affecting the society at large and therefore affecting politics. If you look at some of the statements of Sana Amanat, she talks about comics as being the new mythology for our society, and that she literally wants to use this new mythology in a psychological way in order to push positive ideas, her words, push ideas on society itself. And so they have already ingrained themselves within society at large. That's what they're trying to do. And when they tip their hand, when they start acting in this massively disordered way, which I assert is going to happen just after the next election and for the next 4 years after that, they are going to show every normal person that what the comic industry is doing and what the movie industry that has been built upon the comic industry is doing is taking these traditional heroes and using them for the purpose of social engineering, and that these people who run this industry have tasked themselves with reshaping the minds of the youth in order to fit their political purpose. And in so doing, they will reveal themselves as the villains they actually are. Anyway, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.